Okay, here's the story. This isn't something I made up for Spook Factor, this is what happened. My name is Alex, and I was a film student. For my thesis project, I wanted to do something real, you know? Something raw. I called it The Last Quiet Place, a documentary about finding silence and solitude on the Appalachian Trail. I figured I'd hike a significant portion of it, interview other hikers, and capture the soul of the journey. Looking back, I guess I found a soul out there, just not the one I was looking for. The first few days were exactly what I dreamed of. My camera, a sturdy little Sony A7, captured everything in crisp 4K. I have hours of footage from that first week, and watching it now is difficult. It's like watching a different person. There's me, grinning like an idiot at the lens, my face still clean, my beard just starting to come in. I'm talking about the profound sense of freedom, the burn in my calves feeling like a badge of honor. Day 3, I say in one clip, panning the camera across a ridgeline bathed in the orange glow of dawn. The world just falls away out here. No traffic, no emails, no noise. Just the wind and your own heartbeat. It's a kind of peace you can't buy. My logbook from that time tells the same story. My handwriting is neat, confident. Log entry, Day 4. Woke up before sunrise. The mist in the valley looked like a vast, white ocean. Filmed a time-lapse of it burning off as the sun came up. Met a couple from Ohio, retired teachers. They shared some of their coffee. People are so open out here. There's an immediate trust, a shared understanding. We're all here for the same reason. I feel centered. This project is going to be special. It all felt so safe. Planned. I had my route mapped, my supply drops arranged. I had a GPS beacon, a satellite phone for emergencies. I was prepared. I was in control. That's what I thought, anyway. The illusion of control is a powerful thing. The change came on Day 5. It was late afternoon, the light was turning that perfect golden color filmmakers kill for. The trail had been empty for hours. I was coming down a gentle slope, thinking about where I'd make camp for the night, when I saw him. He was standing just off the path, beside a thicket of mountain laurel, cleaning a squirrel with a small, sharp knife. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a face that looked like it was carved from old leather. He wore faded overalls over a flannel shirt, and a beat-up baseball cap. A hunter, I figured. A local. He looked up as I approached, and his face broke into a wide, almost too friendly smile. His teeth were yellowed. "Afternoon, son," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He wiped the knife on his trousers and stuck out a hand. "Beautiful day for a walk." I shook his hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, dry and calloused. "It really is," I said, trying to be friendly, but also acutely aware of the half-skinned animal at his feet. "Just me and the trail today." "That's the best way to do it," he nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Name's Silas." "Alex," I said. "Nice to meet you." I gestured with my head towards my camera, which was hanging from a strap around my neck. "I'm making a film about the trail." His eyes lit up. "A film, you say? Well, you couldn't have picked a better subject. This mountain's got more stories than a library." He proceeded to give me some advice, genuinely useful stuff. He pointed out a freshwater spring a few miles ahead that wasn't on my map and warned me about a weather front he said he could smell coming in a couple of days. He seemed to know every rock and root of this place. There was something comforting about it, but also intense. The way he talked about the mountain, it was like he was talking about a person. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. I even turned my camera on, figuring this was perfect B-roll. The authentic local character. As I was getting ready to leave, he put a hand on my arm. "Hold on a minute, son. You're heading into the deep woods. Can't go in empty-handed." He reached into a large canvas pouch at his hip and pulled out a few small, braille-looking twigs and a length of rough twine. His gnarled fingers moved with a surprising dexterity. In less than a minute, he'd twisted and tied the sticks together into a small, vaguely human-shaped figure. It was maybe 3 inches tall, with stick arms and legs, and a little loop of twine at the top of its head. He held it out to me. "Here," he said, his smile unwavering. "A little luck from the mountain. Keeps the bad spirits away and watches your back. You hang it on your pack." I took it. To be honest, it was kind of creepy. Primitive. But I'm a polite guy, and he was, on the surface, just being a kind old man. Plus, the filmmaker in me was buzzing. This was gold. "Wow, thanks, Silas. That's really thoughtful." I held it up for the camera, which was still recording. A genuine Appalachian good luck charm. It's more than luck, he said, and his smile tightened just a fraction. It's a guide. It knows the paths. That was a weird thing to say, but I just laughed it off. Well, I can use all the help I can get. Thanks again. I tied the little stick figure to the outside of my backpack, thanked him one more time, and continued down the trail. I walked for about 100 yards before I chanced to look back. He was still standing there in the exact same spot, watching me. He wasn't smiling anymore. He just watched, motionless, until I rounded a bend and he was out of sight. The encounter left me with a strange feeling, a mix of gratitude and a low, humming sense of unease. It was probably nothing, just a local eccentric, I told myself. Adds color to the story. That night, I made camp by the spring Silas had told me about. It was a perfect spot, sheltered by a rock outcropping. I made dinner, feeling good about the day's progress. I had some great footage, some interesting thoughts for my logbook. The weirdness with Silas was already fading, becoming just an anecdote I tell my friends when I got back. Later, snug in my sleeping bag, I fired up my laptop to review the day's footage. It was a ritual for me, a way to organize my thoughts for the next day's shooting. I saw the sweeping valley shots, the close-ups of moss on a rock, the footage of the Ohio couple. Then I got to the clip of Silas. I watched it through once. It played out just as I remembered. His friendly smile, his useful advice, his hands weaving the little doll. It was all there, good stuff, but something gnawed at me. I couldn't shake that final image of him standing there, watching me go. On an impulse, I dragged the playback cursor to the very end of the clip, to the moment just before I turned the camera off. It was a slightly shaky shot of me holding up the stick doll. A genuine Appalachian good luck charm, my recorded voice said. Behind the doll, Silas was in frame. He was smiling, but I decided to pause it right there and zoom in, just to see the expression on his face more clearly. My laptop screen was high resolution. I could see every line, every wrinkle, and what I saw made the blood run cold in my veins. It was only for a split second, maybe a dozen frames before his lips pulled back into that folksy grin. But in that brief moment, his face was a complete and utter mask. His eyes, they weren't looking at me. I mean, they were pointed in my direction, but they weren't seeing me, the film student standing in front of him. They were vacant, empty, like two polished stones, and they were staring directly, unblinkingly, into the lens of my camera. Not at the guy holding it, into the lens itself, as if he could see something through it, something on my side of the screen. Something behind me. I snapped the laptop shut. The click echoed in the tiny tent. Suddenly, the silence of the woods wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, watchful. Every rustle of leaves outside, every snap of a twig, wasn't just the sound of the forest settling for the night. It was the sound of footsteps. I lay there for hours, my heart hammering against my ribs, clutching the satellite phone in my hand. Outside, tied to my pack just a thin layer of nylon away, the little stick doll swung gently in the cold night air. And I had the sickening, certain feeling that I was no longer alone on the trail. Sleep didn't really happen that night. I mean, I must have dozed off at some point from sheer exhaustion, but it wasn't rest. It was that thin, jittery kind of sleep where every sound from outside the tent is magnified 100 times. A snapping twig was a footstep. The rustle of wind in the leaves was a whisper. I kept the laptop next to my sleeping bag, but I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. The image of Silas's face, that split second of absolute, predatory emptiness, was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. By morning, a gray, washed-out light filtered through the tent fabric. I was stiff, cold, and running on a potent cocktail of caffeine from my thermos and pure adrenaline. I had to make a choice. Pack it all in, hit the emergency beacon on my satellite phone, and call it a failed project? Or rationalize. The rational part of my brain, the part that got me into a good film school, was working overtime. It was a trick of the light. Pixelation, a weird, momentary expression from an old man who was probably just a little bit strange. I'd come too far, planned too much, to let a creepy old guy and my own overactive imagination derail the whole thing. So, I chose to rationalize. I told myself it was fine. I was a filmmaker, and this was just part of the story now. The moment the protagonist starts to feel the isolation. It was good drama. I even tried to laugh about it as I packed up my camp, the sound thin and unconvincing in the quiet woods. I made sure the stick doll Silas had given me was still tied securely to my pack. I wasn't sure if I was afraid to have it or afraid to get rid of it. So I just left it there. A problem for another time. The first few hours of hiking on day 6 were an exercise in forced normalcy. I filmed things. I commented into the lens about the quality of the morning light, the specific species of fern growing on a fallen log. I was performing, trying to convince myself and my future audience that everything was still the beautiful, serene adventure I had set out to find. But I kept glancing over my shoulder. The trail behind me was always empty, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like I was the only person on a stage, and the audience was hidden just out of sight in the trees. It was around noon when I saw the first one. I'd stopped to adjust my pack straps, and my eyes just happened to drift up. There, hanging from the branch of a maple tree about 10 feet off the trail, was another one. A little stick figure, identical to the one Silas had made for me. Twisted twigs for a body, a loop of twine for a head. My first thought wasn't fear, it was curiosity. "Huh," I said out loud, to no one. I grabbed my camera. This was interesting. Maybe it was some kind of local tradition, like lovelocks on a bridge. A folk art thing. I filmed it, getting a nice close-up, the focus sharp on the rough texture of the bark and the coarse fibers of the twine. "Log entry, day 6, I said to the camera, my voice trying for that documentarian calm. "Came across this little guy. Looks like the twin brother of the one Silas gave me yesterday. Maybe it's a way local hikers mark the trail? Or some kind of offering to the mountain? Pretty cool." I felt a sense of relief. See? A logical, cultural explanation. Nothing to worry about. I hiked on, feeling a little lighter. But maybe an hour later, I saw another one. This time, it wasn't hanging in plain sight. It was wedged into a crack in a large boulder, almost perfectly camouflaged. I wouldn't have seen it at all if I hadn't stopped right there to drink some water. My relief started to curdle. This placement felt different, less like a public marker and more like a hidden message. It was secretive. I filmed it, too, but I didn't say anything this time. The silence in the recording is heavy. All you can hear is my breathing and the buzz of insects. By the time I saw the third one, the sun was low in the sky, and my rationalizations were completely gone. This one was tucked under a thick fern frond, right at the base of a tree. It was placed so you would only see it if you were looking down at that exact spot. Which I was, because I was exhausted and just staring at my feet as I walked. It was the same design, the same crude craftsmanship. And it was waiting there. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a local custom. 3 times in one day, all on my path. Someone had put these here. And the placement was the thing that really got under my skin. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The first was obvious, to let me know. The next 2 were hidden, to prove that they knew. They knew where I would be. They knew where I would look. A cold dread, heavy and physical like a stone in my gut, settled in. Silas's words echoed in my head. It's a guide. It knows the paths. Panic is a strange thing. It doesn't always make you scream or run. Sometimes it makes you quiet. It makes you methodical. I needed to prove it. I needed to know for sure if I was losing my mind or if I was being hunted. I pulled out my map. The official Appalachian Trail was a clear, marked line. But there were other, smaller trails crisscrossing it. Unmaintained, old logging roads, game trails. Not on the main map. I found one on my topographic overlay, a small path that branched off to the west and was supposed to loop back to the main trail about 2 miles ahead. It was a shortcut on paper, but it would be rougher terrain. And more importantly, no one but me would know I was taking it. "Okay," I whispered, my voice hoarse. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Okay, let's see." I took the turn. The new path was barely a path at all. It was overgrown, and I had to push through low-hanging branches that clawed at my face and clothes. The silence here was different. Deeper. The friendly sounds of the main trail were gone. Here, there was only the sound of my own footsteps crackling on dead leaves and my own ragged breath. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every fallen log looked like a body. I left my camera off. This wasn't for the film anymore. This was for me. I pushed on for what felt like an eternity, but my GPS said it was maybe an hour and a half. I was sweating, scratched up, and my paranoia was at a fever pitch. I kept telling myself that when I rejoined the main trail, there would be nothing. I would have proven it was all in my head. I would have outsmarted whatever this sick game was. I'd be in control again. The thought was the only thing that kept me from turning back. The side trail finally started to widen, and I could see the more well-trodden earth of the main path through the trees ahead. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I was almost there. I took another 20 steps, my eyes fixed on the familiar white blaze painted on a tree that marked the Appalachian Trail. And then I stopped, dead in my tracks, hanging from a low dogwood branch, right at the junction where my secret path met the main one, was a fourth stick figure. It hadn't been there for long. It was still swaying, ever so slightly, in a breeze I couldn't even feel. As if it had just been placed there, waiting for me, exactly where I would come out. I didn't move, I just stood there, staring at it. The world seemed to shrink until it was just me and that little, twisted, faceless thing. It was impossible. No one could have known I would take this path. No one could have gotten ahead of me this quickly on a trail this rough. Unless they didn't need a trail. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't being followed. I was being herded. All the fight went out of me. I stumbled over to a small stream that ran alongside the trail, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I dumped my pack on the ground and splashed cold water on my face, gasping. I was shaking uncontrollably now. I had to get out. I had to call for help. As I pushed myself up from the stream bank, my hands slipped on the wet moss. I staggered and my backpack, which I'd left half unzipped, tipped over. A few items spilled out, a granola bar, my headlamp, a spare battery. And the doll Silas had given me. It tumbled out and fell with a soft plop into the shallow water of the stream. Shit, I muttered, my voice trembling. My first instinct, ridiculously, was not to leave it. It felt like evidence. It felt important. I reached into the clear, cold water to retrieve it. My fingers closed around the wet twigs. As I lifted it out, the water streaming from it, my thumb brushed against the twine wrapped around its middle. And it felt wrong. The twine was looser now, swollen from the water. And underneath it, something was sticking out. Something dark and fine. I held it close to my face, my hands shaking so badly I could barely focus. I used my thumbnail to pry at the wet twine, unraveling the coil around the doll's waist. The strand came free. It was a small lock of hair. Dark brown, almost black, maybe 3 inches long. It was tangled and woven deep into the twine, hidden from view until the water had loosened it. I stood there, the little stick figure in one hand, the wet strand of hair lying across my palm in the other. Water dripped from my fingertips onto the forest floor, and all I could think, over and over, was a single, horrifying thought. My hair is light brown. This wasn't mine. I don't remember walking back to my campsite. I really don't. It's like a chunk of my memory was just scooped out. One moment I'm standing by that stream, the world spinning, a wet lock of someone else's hair sitting in my clammy palm. The next, I'm standing in the small clearing I'd chosen for the night, the sun gone, the woods plunged into that deep, heavy twilight blue. My hands were empty. I must have dropped the hair, dropped the doll. I hope I did. The thought of still having it, of it being in my pack, made my stomach clench. The chill that set in had nothing to do with the evening air. It was a deep, internal cold, a wet blanket kind of fear that suffocated every other thought. For the first time on this trip, the project, the film, all of it, just evaporated. It meant nothing. All that mattered was the shrinking space of my own survival. The game was over. The rationalizations were gone. I wasn't being hazed or pranked. I wasn't imagining things. This was real. Someone was out there, toying with me, hurting me, and they had been close enough to me to get that piece of hair. From who? God? From who? Another hiker? Was I carrying a piece of a dead person? The thought sent a jolt of pure, chemical panic through my system. I fumbled with my pack, my fingers clumsy and stupid. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the sun to come up. That's when my filmmaker brain, the one I thought had shut down, flickered back on, but for a different reason. The camera, it had a night vision mode. It wasn't great, more of a gimmick for ghost hunting shows, but it worked. It could see in the dark. It felt like the most important thing I had ever done. I took out my secondary camera, the smaller one, and a spare battery that was fully charged. I found a decent spot, on top of a flat rock about 30 feet from my tent, partially hidden by a fern. It had a clear view of the tent entrance and the small area around it. I turned it on, switched it to night vision, and made sure the little red, rec light was blinking. A tiny, brave signal in the oppressive darkness. Then I crawled into my tent. Zipping it up felt laughably inadequate, like pulling a bedsheet over my head to hide from a monster. It was a thin wall of nylon against whatever was out there. against the man who didn't need trails. I didn't even try to sleep. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, fully clothed, my hiking boots still on my feet. I clutched my biggest knife, the one I used for camp chores. It felt small and pathetic. Every sound was amplified. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. Every snap of a twig was a bone breaking. I kept telling myself it was just animals. A deer, a fox, a raccoon. The woods are noisy at night. That's normal, but the sounds weren't random. That was the thing. There would be a crackle of leaves to my left. Then silence. A long, long silence. Then, maybe minutes later, a soft thud from the other side of the tent, like something heavy being set down gently. It was the deliberateness of it, the calculated pauses. It felt like someone was testing the perimeter. Circling. I lay there, rigid, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I didn't make a sound. I just held my breath and listened. This went on for hours. Eventually, through sheer mental and physical exhaustion, I must have drifted off into a state that wasn't really sleep. It was just a gray, timeless void. I woke up with a start, the morning light a pale, sickly gray filtering through the tent. Silence. A profound, absolute silence. It was even more unnerving than the noises. I stayed in the tent for a long time, maybe an hour, just listening. Nothing. Finally, I forced myself to move. I unzipped the flap slowly, poking my head out. The clearing was empty. Dew clung to everything, sparkling in the weak light. It looked peaceful, normal. For a crazy second, I thought maybe I had dreamed it all. That the stress had finally gotten to me and I'd had some kind of waking nightmare. Then I remembered the camera. My hands were shaking as I retrieved it from the rock. It was still there, untouched, the little blinking light now off. The battery had died. I hurried back to the tent, feeling exposed and vulnerable out in the open. I zipped myself back inside, pulled out my laptop, and plugged the memory card in. My fingers felt like sausages on the trackpad. I clicked open the video file. The screen lit up with the grainy, ghostly green of the night vision. The first few hours were nothing. Just an empty, static shot of my tent. The wind would move the leaves, a moth would flutter past the lens. I fast-forwarded, my heart thumping. I scanned through the footage, watching the timestamp in the corner jump. 1:14, 2:37, 3:05, and then I saw it. I slammed the spacebar, and the video froze. I leaned in close to the screen, my breath fogging the corner. At the very edge of the frame, where the camera's infrared light started to fade into the deeper darkness of the woods, a shape was standing. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, unmistakably human. A man. He was standing perfectly still, partially obscured by a tree trunk, just watching my tent. I couldn't make out a face, not a single feature. It was just a silhouette. A tall, broad-shouldered silhouette, standing there as if he were a statue. I clicked play, my mouth dry. The figure didn't move. He just stood there. The timestamp in the corner ticked over. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, 10 minutes. He just stood there, completely motionless, watching my tent. Watching me. The sheer patience of it was terrifying. He wasn't trying to get in. He wasn't making any overt threat. He was just observing, letting me know he could. Then, after what the timestamp showed was almost 15 minutes of absolute stillness, the figure slowly, deliberately, took one step back, melting into the pitch-black shadows beyond the camera's reach. And was gone. I felt like I was going to be sick. I snapped the laptop shut. Proof. I had proof. It wasn't in my head. A wave of adrenaline-fueled panic washed over me. I had to get out. Not later. Now. I started throwing my things into my backpack, not even bothering to fold them. Sleeping bag, cookpot, clothes, just shoving it all in. I had to call someone. The park rangers. Anyone. My pack was lumpy and disorganized. I was about to hoist it onto my back when I realized something was missing. My compass. I always kept it in the top flap pocket of my backpack for easy access. It wasn't there. I frantically emptied the pocket. Granola bar wrappers, a lighter, a small bottle of sunscreen. No compass. No, 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 I muttered, my voice a ragged whisper. I dumped the entire contents of my pack onto the tent floor. A chaotic pile of gear. I sifted through it, my panic rising. It wasn't there. It was gone. I stumbled out of the tent, my eyes scanning the campsite, a wild hope that maybe I dropped it last night. And then I saw it. There was a large, mossy boulder on the other side of my small fire pit, about 15 feet from my tent. Sitting right on the very top, placed dead center, was my compass. It wasn't just lying there as if it had fallen. It was placed, positioned, even, neatly. I walked towards it like I was in a trance. It was my compass, the silver one with the small scratch on the glass. I stared down at it, and the needle, the bright red needle, wasn't spinning. It was pointing, rock steady. It was pointing directly north, straight up the trail, straight down the path I was supposed to take. He had been in my camp. While I was cowering in my tent, he hadn't just been circling. He had walked through my campsite. He had opened my pack. He had taken my compass, walked over to that rock, and placed it there as a message. A signpost. I was here, and this is the way you're going. The sheer audacity of it, the silent, intimate violation, was worse than any scream in the night. He was playing with me. I was a mouse in his maze. That was it. I was done. No more hiking. No more project. I scrambled back to my pack, my hands shaking so violently I could barely function. My satellite phone, my emergency lifeline, I always kept it in a waterproof bag, in a separate, deep pocket inside my pack, right next to my water bladder. I had charged it to full on my portable solar panel 2 days ago. It was my one guarantee of safety. I plunged my hand deep into the pack, past the soft bulk of my sleeping bag, my fingers searching for the familiar rubbery texture of the dry bag. I found it. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, surged through me. I pulled it out, but something was wrong. The bag felt flat and hard. I tore open the seal, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tipped the bag, and my satellite phone slid into my palm. The screen wasn't black. It was a spiderweb of shattered glass, radiating out from a single point of impact in the center. It looked like someone had taken a rock and just pressed down hard until it broke. I mashed the power button. Nothing. The screen remained dark and fractured. It was completely dead, useless. I stood there in the silent, dew-covered clearing, holding the broken phone. And a single, ice-cold thought crystallized in my mind, a thought more terrifying than the man on the camera, more terrifying than the compass on the rock. The phone had been in the side pocket, the pocket that was inside my main pack, the pack that had been inside the tent with me all night. I just stood there, holding the two pieces of my life. In one hand, the useless, shattered satellite phone. In the other, the dry bag it came out of. The bag had been deep inside my main pack. The pack had been zipped inside the tent. And I had been inside the tent with it. The silence of the woods was gone. All I could hear was a high, thin ringing sound in my ears. It was the sound of my own sanity fraying at the edges. He hadn't just been watching. He hadn't just been circling and placing my compass on a rock like some kind of cryptic message. He had been inside. He had been in the tent with me. While I was sleeping, or whatever that state of rigid terror was, he had unzipped my tent, opened my pack, rooted around inside it, found the one thing that could save me, and destroyed it. The intimacy of that violation was a physical blow. It was worse than a threat, worse than a scream. It was a statement of absolute ownership. You are mine. Your safety is an illusion I allow. My legs gave out. I didn't fall so much as collapse, landing on my knees on the damp floor of my tent amidst the chaos of my gear. I didn't make a sound. I think, on some level, my brain had simply shut down all non-essential functions. The filmmaker, the adventurer, the student, they were all gone. All that was left was prey. My project, my beautiful, optimistic film about finding peace in the wilderness. The thought was so absurd it was almost funny. A hysterical giggle tried to bubble up from my chest, but it came out as a dry, rasping sob. I was going to be another story whispered around a campfire, another flyer tacked to a bulletin board at a ranger station. Missing hiker, last seen. That galvanized me. Fear is a strange thing. For hours it had paralyzed me, but now this new, absolute certainty of death sparked something else. A final, desperate surge of defiance. I wasn't going to die here, in a tent, waiting for him to come back. If he was going to kill me, he was going to have to catch me first. I moved with a manic energy I didn't know I possessed. I shoved everything back into my pack, not caring how it fit. Tent poles stuck out at odd angles. My cook pot was probably bent. I didn't care. I left the broken phone where it lay, a final monument to my own stupidity. I grabbed the compass from the rock. The red needle still pointed north, up the trail. A mocking invitation. No, I wasn't going that way. That was his path, his game. I looked south, back the way I came. It was days of hiking. He knew that route too. I had only one other option. Off the trail, into the deep woods. It was a stupid, reckless decision, and the logical part of my brain, what was left of it, knew that. You don't leave the trail. That's rule number one. It's how you get lost. It's how you die. But logic didn't live here anymore. I was operating on pure animal instinct. The trail was the snare. I had to chew my own leg off to get out of it. I hoisted my clumsy, heavy pack onto my shoulders, ignored the compass, looked east, and just started walking. Crashing through the undergrowth, away from the path, away from his signs and his games. For the first hour, the adrenaline carried me. Every snap of a twig behind me sent a fresh jolt through my system. I didn't look back, I just pushed forward, my face getting whipped by low-hanging branches, my feet sinking into soft, unfamiliar ground. The sun was up, but under the thick canopy of leaves, the world was a perpetual twilight of green and brown. There was no path. There were no markers. There was only the slope of the land and the desperate need to put distance between me and that campsite. Then the weather turned. It started subtly. The air grew heavy, thick with a humidity that clung to my skin. The light filtering through the leaves dimmed from a dull green to a sickly gray. A low rumble echoed in the distance, a sound so deep I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. The wind picked up, rustling the treetops with a sound like a great, sighing breath. I kept moving. A raindrop hit my cheek, cold and fat. Then another, and another. Within 10 minutes, it was a downpour. Not just rain, but a brutal, wind-driven deluge that turned the forest into a churning, roaring chaos. The sky vanished behind a sheet of gray. Water streamed down my face, blinding me. The ground turned to slick mud, and every step was a gamble. My pack, already heavy, now felt like it was filled with lead as it soaked through. The cold came next, a deep, bone-aching chill that the frantic movement couldn't keep at bay. My teeth started to chatter. I was lost, soaked, and freezing. Hypothermia was a real and immediate threat now. I had to find shelter. I had to get out of the rain. I scanned the blurry, rain-whipped landscape, my eyes stinging. Trees, rocks, more trees. Nothing. Just as a wave of genuine despair was about to swallow me whole, I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, maybe 100 yards away, was a shape. A dark, rectangular shape that didn't belong. A structure, a cabin. Hope, fierce and idiotic, flared in my chest. I half ran, half slid down a muddy embankment towards it. It was old, very old. The wood was dark gray, almost black with age and moisture. The roof sagged in the middle, and a few shingles were missing, but it was standing. The door was a simple plank construction, and the windows were just square holes, dark and empty. It looked like it had been forgotten by the world for 100 years. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the groaning plank door open and stumbled inside, out of the roaring storm. The sound of the rain was instantly muffled, reduced to a dull drumming on the roof. I leaned against the inside of the door, gasping for air, water streaming off me onto the dirt floor. The air inside was thick, stagnant, smelling of damp earth, rotting wood, and something else. Something faintly metallic and sour, like old pennies. It was dark. The two small, panelless windows didn't let in much light from the storm-darkened day. As my eyes slowly adjusted, I took in the space. It was a single room, maybe 10 by 15 feet. There was a crude stone fireplace on one end, choked with old, cold ashes. A rough-hewn wooden table with one leg shorter than the others sat in the center. Along one wall were some rickety-looking shelves. It was completely empty, a forgotten relic. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me cry. I was safe. I was dry. I shrugged off my heavy pack, letting it fall to the floor with a wet thud. I was just about to start digging for my dry bag of clothes when my eyes, now fully accustomed to the gloom, really started to see the details. The shelves weren't empty. There was something on them. I walked closer. It was a metal water bottle, a modern one with a carabiner clipped to the lid. It had faded stickers on it, a smiling cartoon sun and the logo of a national park out west. And scratched into the metal, messily, were the letters SARAH. A cold knot formed in my stomach. That was odd. Why would someone leave a perfectly good water bottle here? I looked at the shelf below it. There was a single hiking boot. It was caked in dried mud, the laces gone, the toe scuffed clean through. It looked exactly like the brand I was wearing. My eyes scanned the rest of the room. Tucked in a corner near the fireplace was a pair of glasses, one lens cracked, the other completely gone. On the floor beneath the table was a book. I picked it up. The cover was warped and swollen from damp, the title illegible. I opened it. The pages were fused together in a solid block, but on the inside cover, I could just make out a handwritten inscription. To my dearest Ben, may you find what you're looking for. Love, Mom. This wasn't a shelter. This wasn't a forgotten hunter's cabin. I backed away slowly, my heart starting to pound a frantic, sick rhythm against my ribs. My gaze swept the room again, seeing it for what it was now. Every dark corner held something. A tattered polyester shirt draped over a nail. A single trekking pole, its tip bent at a sharp angle. A small, child-sized backpack, faded to a pale pink, leaning against the far wall. These weren't discarded items. They were arranged. They were displayed. This was a collection, a museum of the lost. My breath hitched, and I remembered the doll Silas had given me. The Bua Me Man Kua Nui Rung, the good luck charm from the woods. My eyes shot to the darkest corner of the cabin, a space behind the fireplace that I hadn't really looked at. There was a pile of something there, a heap of small, spindly, dark objects. I took a hesitant step closer, then another. My brain refused to process what I was seeing, tried to explain it away as a pile of firewood, a packrat's nest, anything else. But it wasn't. It was a pile of dolls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all made from twisted twigs and bound with twine, just like mine. Some were fresh, the wood still light. Others were old and dark, covered in cobwebs and dust, slowly decomposing back into the earth. They were all slightly different, just like you'd expect from something handmade, but they were all unmistakably the same thing. They were stacked in a heap that reached my waist, a grotesque, silent congregation of stick figure effigies. I saw them for what they were. Trophies, grave markers, one for each item on the shelves. One for Sarah, one for Ben, one for the little girl with the pink backpack. Each one a life, condensed into a small, pathetic symbol and thrown on a pile. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, animal sound of pure horror. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own pack and falling hard onto the dirt floor. I crab-walked away, my eyes fixed on that pile, that testament to years, maybe decades, of methodical, patient evil. This wasn't some random crazy person I had run into. This was a system, a ritual. He had done this before. So many times. I finally understood. The strange symbols on the trail weren't a warning to me. They were a countdown, a marking of territory. The compass wasn't a taunt. It was a tool, guiding me into the heart of the maze. He wasn't just chasing me, he was hurting me. Just like he had hurted all the others. I was just the next one in line. The project for this season. I have to get out of here. The thought was a scream in my mind. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my pack. I didn't care about the storm. I would rather face the lightning and the cold than spend one more second in this tomb. I lunged for the door, my hand closing around the rough, splintery wood. And then I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain drumming on the roof. It was a different sound. A closer sound. A sound that cut through the storm's roar with chilling clarity. Creak. It was the sound of the cabin door, the one my hand was resting on, being pushed open from the outside. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My hand fell away from the door as if it were white hot. I held my breath, my lungs burning. The door continued to swing inward, slowly, deliberately. A sliver of gray, rainy light cut across the dirt floor, widening with agonizing slowness. It opened just enough for a person to slip through. And then a boot appeared in the opening. A heavy, dark leather hiking boot, caked with fresh, wet mud and dead leaves. It stepped inside, planting itself silently on the floor. Then the other boot followed, just as muddy, just as silent. The figure stood there in the doorway, silhouetted against the raging storm, letting the wind and rain howl into the room. I was hidden in the shadows by the fireplace, my entire body shaking so hard I was sure he could hear my bones rattling. He hadn't seen me yet. He couldn't have. He stood there for a long moment, dripping water onto the floor, and then, with a soft click, he pushed the door shut, plunging the room back into near total darkness. The silence was the worst part. For a solid 10 seconds after the door clicked shut, the only sound in the universe was the frantic, wet hammering of my own heart and the sudden, muffled drumming of the rain on the roof. The roar of the storm was gone, shut out, and in its place was a new sound. Drip, drip, drip. It was the sound of water running off a rain-soaked coat and hitting the dirt floor. I was crouched in the deepest shadows, back pressed against the cold, gritty stones of the fireplace, trying to make myself smaller than I had ever been. My entire body was a single, rigid muscle. I held my breath until my lungs felt like they were on fire. The air, already thick with the smell of rot and old pennies, now carried a new scent. Wet wool and damp earth. The smell of the outdoors, brought inside. I couldn't see him, not really. He was just a shape, a pillar of darkness standing against the slightly less dark rectangle of the door. He didn't move, he just stood there, dripping, breathing. I could hear that, too. A slow, even breath. Not labored, not excited. Calm, like a man who had just come in from a walk. The sheer, maddening normality of it was a kind of psychological torture. My mind was a screaming, white-hot static. This was it. This was the end of the game. He had herded me here, to his little museum of death, his trophy room. He hadn't expected me to be here now, maybe, but this was always the intended destination. I was supposed to be another exhibit. My camera, my journal, maybe one of my shoes, placed neatly on a shelf. Another one of those grotesque little stick dolls thrown onto the pile. For a long moment that felt like a year, we both just existed in that cabin. The predator and the prey, sharing the same suffocating air, separated by 20 feet of darkness. My eyes started to adjust, just a little. I could make out the bulk of his shoulders, the vague outline of a hat. He still hadn't moved. Was he listening? Was he waiting for me to make a sound, to give myself away? Then, he took a step. The floorboard under his boot let out a low groan. It was the sound of a death sentence being read. He took another step, slow, deliberate, moving toward the center of the room. I think I made a noise then. A tiny whimper, a sound so small it was probably lost in the drumming of the rain, but to me, it was a thunderclap. His head turned slightly in my direction. He knew. In that instant, my brain did something strange. The terror didn't vanish, not at all, but it was like a circuit breaker flipped. The part of me that was frozen solid was suddenly flooded with a different kind of energy. It wasn't bravery, it was the frantic, thoughtless instinct of a cornered animal. I wasn't going to die cowering in a corner. My eyes darted to the side, to the rickety shelves holding the artifacts of the dead. Sarah's water bottle, Ben's book, the single hiking boot. The shelves were my only chance. My only weapon. He took a third step. He was closer now. I could almost make out the texture of his jacket. It was now or never. I lunged, not towards the door, but sideways. My hands found the rough, splintery wood of the shelving unit. I didn't try to grab a weapon. I just put my shoulder into it and pushed with every ounce of strength I had left. The sound was apocalyptic in the small space. A high, wrenching shriek of tortured wood, followed by a deafening crash as the whole thing went over. The metal water bottle clanged and bounced across the floor. Glass shattered, the cracked spectacles. The single boot hit the ground with a dull thud. It was a cacophony of chaos, and for a split second, it worked. I heard a grunt of surprise from the darkness. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I scrambled, crab walking backwards and then spinning around, my feet finding the heavy, wet weight of my own backpack on the floor. I stumbled over it, almost went down, but stayed upright. The door. I just had to get to the door. I threw myself at it, my hand fumbling for a handle that wasn't there. I just grabbed the edge and pulled. The heavy plank door groaned open, and the storm roared back into my ears, a blast of wind and rain hitting me in the face. It felt like salvation. I burst out into the deluge, into the gray, churning chaos of the forest. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I ran. I abandoned everything. My backpack with my tent, my food, my journal, all of it was left behind on the floor of that mausoleum. I didn't care. It was weight I couldn't afford. The only thing I still had, clutched in a white-knuckled death grip, was my camera. I don't even know why. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just there, still recording. The forest was a nightmare, a blur of green and brown, lashed by silver sheets of rain. The ground was a treacherous soup of mud and slick, dead leaves. I ran with no direction, no plan, just blind, animal panic. Away. I just had to get away. I crashed through thick undergrowth that tore at my clothes and skin, low-hanging branches whipping my face. Every sound, the snap of a twig under my own foot, the groan of a tree in the wind, was him. He was right behind me. He had to be. I ran until my body was nothing but a machine of pain. My side was a knot of fire. My breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. The camera in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. How long had it been? 5 minutes? An hour? Time had ceased to exist. There was only the run. Eventually, the sheer physical exhaustion began to outweigh the terror. My frantic sprint slowed to a jog, then a stumbling walk. I leaned against a massive, moss-covered oak, head down, trying to drag air into my collapsing lungs, rainwater and tears mixing on my face. The storm was starting to ease up a little. The torrential downpour had softened to a steady, hard rain. The wind wasn't howling anymore, just sighing through the canopy. For a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. I looked around. The forest was dense, unfamiliar. I was hopelessly lost. But maybe, just maybe, he was lost too. Maybe that diversion had worked. Maybe he was back there, searching the wreckage, and I had gotten away. I straightened up, wiping the water from my eyes. I had to keep moving, but slower now. Find a different kind of shelter. Survive the night. I took a few tentative steps forward, pushing aside a heavy, wet fern. And I saw it. Through a break in the trees, in a small, unnaturally quiet clearing, was another building. It wasn't the dilapidated cabin I had just fled. This one was smaller, neater. It was a proper log cabin, with a solid-looking roof and a small porch. Smoke, thin and white, was curling lazily from a stone chimney. My blood ran cold. My hope didn't just flicker and die, it was violently snuffed out. This couldn't be. It was impossible. This was miles from the trail. Miles from anywhere. My brain tried to reject what I was seeing. A hunter? Another hiker? It had to be. And then I saw the figure sitting on the porch. He was sitting in a simple wooden rocking chair, sheltered from the rain by the porch roof. He was hunched over something in his lap, his hands busy. It was a man, and he was wearing a familiar hat and a dark, heavy jacket. It was Silas. He wasn't searching for me. He hadn't been tricked. He was just here, waiting. In his lap, he was holding a small branch and a pocket knife. With calm, unhurried movements, he was whittling, shaving off thin slivers of bark, shaping the wood, making another doll. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a sob, because he stopped. His hands went still. He slowly, so slowly, lifted his head. His eyes found me across the clearing, standing half hidden behind the ferns. There was no surprise on his face. No anger, no emotion at all, really. Just a flat, patient recognition. Then, the corners of his mouth turned up into a small, tight smile. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a horrible, knowing smile. And he spoke. His voice carried across the damp air, calm and conversational, cutting through the sound of the rain. You made better time than I expected. My sanity snapped. That was it. That was the final wire to break. I didn't scream. I didn't think. My body just reacted. I spun around and ran. The final chase began. The camera, still clutched in my hand, captured it all. The world became a chaotic, bouncing blur. The ground, a nauseating swirl of brown mud and green moss. The sky, a sliver of gray seen through shaking leaves. My breathing was a raw, percussive roar in the microphone, a desperate, inhuman sound of an animal running for its very life. And behind me, a new sound. His sound, not running, not frantic, just a heavy, rhythmic, and impossibly fast tread. Thump, thump, thump. The cracking of branches under his boots was getting closer. He wasn't even trying to be quiet. He was the locomotive, and I was just the rabbit on the tracks. He was just closing the distance. The sound was right behind me, right in my ear. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my shoes. He was going to grab me. Any second now. I hazarded a single, stupid glance over my shoulder. He was there, not 10 feet away. His face was a pale mask in the gloom, his eyes fixed on me. He wasn't even breathing hard. My eyes snapped forward again, but it was too late. My foot caught on something, a thick, gnarled root snaking across the forest floor. There was no time to recover, no time to even put my hands out. My world tilted violently. I went down, hard. The impact knocked the air from my lungs and the camera from my hand. It flew through the air in a dizzying arc, tumbling end over end, before landing with a soft thud in a patch of wet moss a few feet away. The lens was pointing straight up. The recording continued. The frame was filled with the swaying, dripping canopy of the trees above, rain streaking down the lens like tears. My own ragged, panicked gasps could be heard, close and desperate. Then, another sound, the sound of footsteps, slowing from a run to a walk. Two heavy, dark leather hiking boots, caked in fresh mud and dead leaves, entered the top of the frame. They took one more step, then stopped. They were right over the camera. They were right over me. They filled the entire view, blocking out the sky. They just stood there, waiting, for a second, 2 seconds. Then the screen went black. It was a Tuesday when a couple of kids, college students on a weekend trip, brought the camera in. I've been a park ranger in these mountains for 15 years, and you get used to people bringing you things. Lost wallets, single hiking poles, a surprising number of water bottles. But not this. Not a digital camera caked in mud, with a lens that looked like it had been crying. And not the journal they found with it, its pages swollen and warped with rain, the ink in the last few entries bleeding together into a blurry, panicked mess. The kids were shaken. They said they found it in a patch of moss just off a lesser-used spur trail, maybe 5 miles north of the Lonesome Pine Shelter. Said it looked like someone had just dropped it. We thanked them, took their names, and told them we'd handle it. The first thing we do in a situation like this is check the device for clues to the owner's identity. Standard procedure. My partner, Dave, took the memory card out and slotted it into the station's computer. Most of the early footage was what you'd expect. Sweeping shots of the ridges at dawn, interviews with smiling through hikers, a young man talking to the camera with infectious enthusiasm. His name was Alex, a film student from a university back east. He was making a documentary. We found his name in the front of the journal, too. Alex Weaver, Appalachian Trail Documentary, Project Stillness. Everything was normal, beautiful, even. Then the files got darker. The timestamps were from later dates. The optimistic narration was gone, replaced by shaky, worried breathing. And then there was the last file, number 27. It was only about 2 minutes long. It starts with chaos, a world of green and brown, spinning and lurching. You can't make anything out, just the blur of the forest floor rushing past. The only sound is this raw, ragged gasping. It's not just someone out of breath from a run, it's the sound of pure, animal terror. It's a sound I've heard before, but hope to never hear again. Then, a thud. The camera lands, pointing up at the canopy. Rain streaks down the lens. For a few seconds, all you hear is the desperate, wet panting of the person on the ground and the steady drip of water from the leaves above. And then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, they come into frame from the top. 2 muddy, dark leather hiking boots. They stop, filling the view, blocking out what little light there is. They just stand there, over him, over the camera, for an eternity that lasts about 3 seconds. Then the recording cuts out. We launched a full-scale search and rescue that afternoon. The weather was still miserable, a cold, persistent drizzle that turned every rock slick and every slope into a mudslide. We used the GPS coordinates from the camera's metadata as our starting point. We had 3 SAR teams, local volunteers, and a dog unit. 2 days we searched. We swept the area in expanding grids, shouting his name until our throats were raw. Alex, Alex Weaver. The only replies were the wind and the call of a raven. We found the ransacked lean-to he'd described in his journal, the one with the horrible collection of hikers' belongings. We bagged everything as evidence, but we found no sign of Alex, or the man he called Silas. On the 3rd day, a volunteer team in Grid Charlie, way off the trail in a steep ravine, found him. One of the guys almost stepped on him. He was curled up under a rock outcropping, hidden behind a curtain of rhododendron. He was alive, barely, dehydrated to the point of delirium, suffering from exposure, covered in scratches and bruises. But his heart was still beating. When I saw him in the hospital a few days later, he was better. IV fluids had put some life back into him, but his eyes were still out there in the woods. They were 1,000 yards away, staring at something none of us could see. I sat with a sheriff's deputy, a young guy named Peterson, while Alex told us the story. He spoke in a low, flat voice, as if recounting a movie he'd seen, not something he'd lived through. He went through it all. Meeting Silas, the strange stick figures, the sounds at night, the Laban on the rock, the horrifying cabin filled with trophies, the final chase. He was toying with me, Alex whispered, staring at the white blanket on his bed. The whole time, he wasn't just hunting me. He was directing me, pushing me exactly where he wanted me to go. That second cabin, it was his home. He was there waiting for me. He knew I'd end up there. Peterson, the deputy, was jotting things down in his notepad, his face a mask of professional skepticism. "And this man, Silas," Peterson said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can you describe him again?" Alex did. Older man, maybe late 50s, early 60s. Weathered face, graying beard. A heavy build, strong. Wore an old canvas jacket and a dark watch cap. Moved through the woods like he was born in them. A typical description of a dozen local hunters or seasoned hikers. It wasn't much to go on, but we had a place to start. The Appalachian Trail has its legends, its long-term residents and its ghosts. We cross-referenced missing persons reports, old park violations, anything we could think of, matching the description. After a few hours we got a hit. A potential match from a bolo, Be on the Lookout, issued 5 years back. The next day Peterson and I went back to the hospital. We had a photograph. It was a printed copy of a driver's license photo, a bit grainy. "Alex," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I need you to look at this photo. Take your time. Tell me if this is the man you saw." I handed it to him. He took it with a trembling hand. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. His breathing hitched. His knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the printed paper. He didn't look up. He just nodded, a small, jerky movement. "That's him," he breathed. "That's Silas." Peterson and I exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of victory. It was something else. "Are you 100% sure, son?" Peterson asked. Alex finally looked up from the photo, his eyes wild with a terrible certainty. "I spent the worst day of my life running from that face. I will never forget that face. That's him." I sat back in the uncomfortable plastic chair and took a deep breath. This was the part one hadn't been looking forward to. "Alex," I said slowly, "the man in that picture, his name is Silas Blackwood. And you're right, he knew these woods better than anyone. He was one of us. He was a park ranger. A damn good one." Alex just stared at me, his confusion warring with the fear on his face. He's been listed as missing for 5 years, Alex," I continued, laying it out piece by piece. "He vanished without a trace during a solo patrol on the exact same stretch of trail you were on. We conducted one of the biggest search operations in this park's history for him. We found his truck at the trailhead. We never found him." The color drained from Alex's face. He looked down at the photo again, then back at us. The logic wasn't working. The story wasn't fitting together. No, that's impossible. He talked to me. He chased me. He tried to kill me." "We believe you," I said, and I meant it. We'd seen the footage. We'd seen the cabin. We'd seen the state Alex was in when we found him. We just don't understand it. That should have been the end of it. A strange, unsolvable case. A missing ranger who somehow survived for 5 years in the wilderness, only to turn into a monster who hunts hikers. A story for the ages, but a dead end. But Alex's case prompted us to officially reopen Silas Blackwood's cold case file. We went back through all the old evidence, the original reports, the interviews. And in the evidence locker, in a sealed plastic box, we found his patrol bag, recovered from his abandoned truck 5 years ago. Inside that bag was his logbook. It was a standard issue ranger's journal. Most of it was routine. Trail maintenance notes, weather observations, wildlife sightings. His handwriting was neat, professional, methodical. But the very last entry, on the last page, was different. The date was from the day he disappeared. The handwriting was a frantic, terrified scrawl, the pen digging so deep it tore the paper. It was just a few lines. I remember standing in the quiet of the evidence room, the smell of old paper and dust in the air, with Peterson looking over my shoulder. I read the words out loud, and the silence that followed was heavier than any mountain. "I see him now, the stick man. He gave me a doll, said it was to show me the way.